Good morning, second graders. Alrighty, Miss Catrone here, and we are ready for our listening and learning lesson 5. So we're in domain 9, which is all about the American Civil War. So before I start my read aloud, if you don't have your materials in front of you, some things that you're going to need are a piece of paper or a journal, something to write on, and then a pencil, a marker, and I'll even let you use pen, just something to write with. So go get those things if you don't have them already. If you need to pause the video to go collect what you need, that's fine. I'll be waiting when you get back. Alrighty, so today, like I said, it's lesson 5, and our read aloud is called The Division of the United States. Division means to divide or separate. So we know that there's a big issue that a lot of people have been talking about. That is the issue over what to do about slavery and how this is going to divide our country. So let's review some things that we've already learned, because you have learned a lot in these first 4 lessons. But what important issue did Lincoln talk about in his debate with Douglas? What important issue did Lincoln talk about in his debate with Douglas? Yeah, they talked about slavery. Douglas thought that each state should be able to decide what they did about slavery. And Lincoln said, you know, this is not right. This is unfair in the way that we're treating people, and I don't want slavery to be allowed in any of the new territories out west. All right, so we just kind of talked about how Lincoln felt about slavery. He thought that it wasn't right and that it shouldn't be allowed to continue into their new territories. In what part of the country was slavery illegal or not allowed? What part? Yeah. In the North, the northern states, our state of New York is a northern state. So in the northern states, it was illegal or not allowed, which meant in the South, in the southern states, it was allowed because they used slaves to do their work on their plantations. All right, what were some other ways that the North and South were different? What other ways were the North and South different? That's what your journal entry was about yesterday, so you guys should have some good answers for me. Yeah, so I actually read an awesome journal entry from Trey, and he talked about how in the North, they worked in factories to produce steel, and they paid their workers. And in the South, they grew crops on plantations, and they did not pay the slaves. Excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. So those were some good differences. Great job on your journal, Trey. Alrighty, today what we're going to be doing is, this is the last part of the read aloud from yesterday, so I'm going to read it to you, and it's going to kind of lead us into today's read aloud. Yesterday it said this: even those who were not against slavery or did not think it was wrong would have a hard time trying to prove that it was not tearing the country apart. In an earlier speech, Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." So the country is being torn apart because people disagree about this issue. I want you to make a prediction about what is going to happen to the country because of people's differing views on slavery. What do you think will happen in this country because people do not agree about slavery? You can write down your prediction or tell someone next to you. Alrighty, I'm so excited to hear your predictions. Let's see and listen if our predictions are correct. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we will begin our read aloud for today. Alrighty, here we have a portrait of Abraham Lincoln. We started learning about him yesterday. We know that his views on slavery are that he thinks it's wrong. He lives in Illinois, and he does not want slavery to keep going into the Western territories. So here we go. The division of the United States. In this portrait is when Abraham Lincoln is president. So the caption is President Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election in 1860 to become the 16th president of the United States. Unfortunately, the election only proved how divided the country really was. Lincoln believed that slavery should not be expanded to the new states being formed in the West. Many people in the North agreed with this idea and voted for Lincoln. Why would people in the North vote for Lincoln? Yeah, people voted in the North voted for Lincoln because where they lived, slavery was illegal and they knew that it was wrong. Um, in the South, many people disliked Lincoln. And in fact, people could not even vote for Lincoln in 9 states in the South because his name was not on their list of candidates. So when they went to vote in 9 states, his name wasn't even on the ballot. They didn't even give them an option. That's how much they didn't want him to be president. Despite not being on the ballot in 9 states, and without the support of a single Southern state, on November 8th, 1860, Lincoln was elected or chosen president because there were more people living in the North who voted for him. Many of the Southern states strongly believed that the North and President Lincoln wanted to take away their right to set their own laws and wanted to abolish slavery. The conflict was worsening. That means it's getting worse. All right, next picture. All right, so here we have a view of the United States. It's a map of the United States at this time. If we see here, we see the Mason-Dixon line, which we learned a little bit about yesterday, that divides the northern states from the southern states. All right, so let's look at our key. I talked about a key yesterday, and that just talks about, whoopsies, what the colors mean. So here we have in gray, these are Confederate states. In the blue, these are all Union states, and the yellow is territories. I know those words might be new to you, but we're going to find out what they mean in the next section. Here we go. A couple of months after Lincoln was elected president, something unbelievable happened. Something Lincoln and many others had feared and hoped would never happen. Several southern states seceded or declared that they were no longer part of the United States. South Carolina was the first to secede. So this is South Carolina, this SC, and it was the first state which seceded or broke away from the United States and said they were not part of this country anymore. The states of Mississippi, that is right here, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana, and Texas soon followed. So those are all those gray states. So all the way from Texas, this is Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida. They followed. South Carolina was first. All 7 supported slavery, and all believed that the US government under Lincoln would force them into doing things they did not want to do, such as abolish or end slavery. These southern states intensely believed that they should be in charge of themselves, so they broke away and declared that they were forming their own country. They called their new country the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy for short. A confederacy is just a group of states. So this group of 7 states decided that they were breaking away and they were going to be their own country. The Confederacy elected its own president, a man named Jefferson Davis. All right, I'm going to pause this really quick so I can pull up a picture of Jefferson Davis. So give me one moment, please. Maybe I'm not going to pause it because I actually do not know how to do that. Alrighty, well, let's see what I can pull up here. If I go right about here, I'm going to go to our image cards. And Jefferson Davis, this new president of the Confederacy, is on, here he is. Yeah, here he is. All right, so this is who they elected to be their president. Now back to our story. This way. All right, next picture. Second grade, thank you for being so patient for me. This technology is new and I'm trying to all figure it out how to show you so many things at one time. So thank you for being patient. Alrighty, here we have Charleston in 1861. Miss Catrona actually went to Charleston this summer when I was moving home from Florida. I drove through Charleston. It's a city in South Carolina. Remember, South Carolina was the first one to secede. But Lincoln was not going to allow the United States of America to be broken up into two separate countries. Lincoln said that it was against national law for a state to secede. Therefore, he said he would do everything in his power to unify the country. He hoped that he would be able to do this peacefully without a war. Nobody wanted a war, including Jefferson Davis. But as the months passed, it became clear that it would be impossible to avoid it. Why do you think people thought it would be impossible to avoid a war between the North and the South? They thought it would be impossible to avoid the war. Yeah, I think it's because the people could not agree. And even though Lincoln said that it was illegal for these states to secede, they said, well, we're going to do it anyway. And I think that's what caused the war. Let's find out. To learn what happened next, it is important to know about an event that took place in the city of Charleston, South Carolina, in April of 1861, just after Lincoln became president. So remember, South Carolina is up. It is this one right here. It was the first one to secede. So this is a picture of their city, Charleston. Charleston was a beautiful, charming, and wealthy city in the South. If Charleston was wealthy or rich city, did Charleston, South Carolina have a good economy or a bad economy? They were wealthy. Yeah, they had a good economy. Its residents were proud of their beautiful city and proud of their Southern heritage. Heritage is a way of life passed down from generations, so it's similar to like traditions. The people of Charleston were proud of the South and how things were done in the South. They were also proud of their good economy. Charleston was an important port city. From its harbor, valuable goods such as cotton, sugar, and tobacco, which had been grown and harvested by enslaved Africans on plantations, were carried by ships across the sea to countries in Europe. When people in Europe bought cotton, sugar, and tobacco from Southern plantations, it was good for the Southern economy because they were trading money for goods. So they sold them the sugar, cotton, and tobacco, and they sent them money for those things. So it's good for their economy. Alrighty, here is a fort. I actually went to this fort when I was in South Carolina this summer. And this is called Fort Sumter.
Summer begins June 20th. And then?
Thanks, Sari. All right, so this is Fort Sumter. Important ports like Charleston needed protections, so they built forts along the shore. The largest and most important of these forts was called Fort Sumter. So the fort is right in here. There it is, behind all that smoke. Forts like these, with their large cannons and soldiers, were built to protect the harbor from invasions by pirates and enemy ships in times of war. Although Fort Sumter was in South Carolina, a Confederate state, the fort still belonged to the United States. The Confederates wanted Fort Sumter for themselves. They knew that they could not have a real country of their own as long as the U.S. soldiers were guarding the fort and controlling its guns. Fort Sumter also created a problem for President Lincoln. It was a fort located in an area now claimed by the Confederacy. President Lincoln now had three options. 1, tell the U.S. soldiers to leave the fort. 2, send more U.S. soldiers to defend the fort against the Confederate soldiers. Or 3, send supplies such as food to the fort to see if the Confederate soldiers would try to stop them. This was a difficult decision. If President Lincoln chose the first option, having the U.S. soldiers leave the fort, he would be saying that he agreed with South Carolina's decision to secede. If he chose the second option, sending more troops to defend the fort, the Confederacy might accuse him of starting a war. President Lincoln chose the third option, sending new supplies to see if the Confederacy would let the ships through. At the same time, the Confederates raised an army of their own. They summoned Fort Sumter and tried to convince the soldiers inside to surrender. But the soldiers said they had orders from President Lincoln to stay put, and that is exactly what those soldiers did. When the Confederacy heard President Lincoln was planning to send more supplies to the fort, the Confederacy opened fire. That means that they started shooting their guns. All right, here we have a picture of a woman, and her name is Mary Chestnut, and she's watching the bombardment of Fort Sumter. I'm going to read you guys a little short story about Fort Sumter next. Early in the morning of April 12, 1861, before the sun had even risen, a woman named Mary Boykin Chestnut sat upright in her bed, as though she'd awakened from a bad dream. Then she heard a sound, the same type of sound that had shaken her from her sleep. A distant, low boom, as she described in her diary. What do you think that sound is? Yeah, maybe it is a cannon going off. Thinking it must be thunder, she put her head back down on her pillow. The room was pitch black, but through the window she could see that the sun was just barely beginning to rise, casting a light blue, slightly yellow light from the eastern sky. Suddenly there was a series of very loud explosions. Boom, boom, boom! These sounds were much closer. Mary Chestnut knew that the sounds were from cannons, not thunder. The cannons in the small fort nearest the town were opening fire, and Mrs. Chestnut knew that these were the Confederate cannons. Mary walked out onto the upstairs porch in time to see the light from the nearby cannons as they fired another volley into the early morning air. Mary was witnessing the bombardment at Fort Sumter. All right, here we have our next picture is going to be of Mary writing in her journal. All morning, all afternoon, and all through the night, for 34 hours straight, the Confederate cannons fired on Fort Sumter. The U.S. soldiers in the fort had cannons of their own, and they fired back. The air around Charleston filled with smoke from the explosions of massive guns. Massive is another word for very large. Who do you think is going to win this battle? Is it going to be the Confederate or the Union? Let's find out. As the house rattled from the boom of guns, Mary Chestnut sat down and wrote in her journal, "Fort Sumter has been on fire." Then, in the early evening of April 13th, all the guns fell silent, and the U.S. soldiers in Fort Sumter finally surrendered. Amazingly, nobody on either side had been killed or seriously injured by enemy fire. Damaged Fort Sumter now belonged to the Confederacy. So the southern states that had seceded and became their own country called the Confederacy had won Fort Sumter. More important, it became clear that war could not be avoided. Alrighty, here we have a map of the United States and all the states that seceded from the Union. So remember at first the Confederacy was just this: Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina. But now we see a lot more states are gray. That means that they are Confederate states and they are looking to secede or separate. After the Battle of Fort Sumter, many southern states joined the Confederacy. Virginia, that's this one, VA, this gray one. Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. As well as portions of Kentucky and Missouri. So these green ones, not the whole state seceded, but portions of them did. In all, there were 13 Confederate states, all from the South. It is important to remember that the states of Kentucky and Missouri did not actually secede from the United States, even though some people from those states decided to fight for the Confederacy. The remaining states, those who had not seceded, were in the North, and they became known as the Union. What are the names of the two sides fighting in the war? You can write it down, you can tell someone next to you. You can shout it at the computer. Yeah, so these southern states are now called the Confederacy, and these northern states are called the Union. Very good. If I look at my key, I can see that the Union is the blue and the Confederate are the gray. Oh, this is some flags that we see. That's the next picture that I see. So one is the Union flag and one is the Confederate flag. The Confederacy made a flag to symbolize its new country. The Confederate flag, this is the one on the bottom left, and right here, has 7 stars to symbolize the first set of states that seceded from the Union. Remember those original 7. The flag pictured on the bottom right was 13 stars, and it symbolizes the Confederacy after the battle at Fort Sumter. So remember, initially only 7 states seceded, and then as a total there were 13, so this is their next flag. When more states joined, that's where they got the more stars. States in the Union continued to fly the traditional flag of the United States. So they still flew the original flag of the United States in the Union or the North. Which at the time of the Civil War had 34 stars, 1 for each state, including the Confederate states. With the Battle of Fort Sumter, a new and painful chapter of American history began. Mary Chestnut, for her part, continued to write in her journal, keeping a record of the Civil War through the eyes of a Southerner. By the end of the war, Charleston, where it all began, was very fortunate that it was not burned to the ground, like many other cities in the South. Alrighty. That was a crazy story about that battle at Fort Sumter. All right. For this next part, I'm going to be asking you some questions. So this is a great time to make sure that you have your pencil and your paper if you didn't get it earlier. God bless you. Were your predictions about whether the country was being torn apart because of its differing views on slavery correct? Why or why not? Everyone's going to have a different answer for this because you could have made your own prediction. Alrighty. Question number 2. What important job was Lincoln elected a couple of years after losing his Senate race to Douglas? So he didn't win the Senate seat, but he was elected to do something very important. What was that? Yeah, he was actually elected to be our president, our 16th president. All right, question number 3. What was the word union a name for? What was the word union a name for? We have a picture of, here we have the Confederate flag. Here we have the Union flag. What was the Union named for? Yeah, so it was the name of the northern states that are still part of the original United States. They called themselves the Union. Why did South Carolina and then additional southern states decide to secede from the United States once Lincoln was elected? Why did they decide to secede or separate themselves once Lincoln was elected? Or all these gray ones. Yeah, because they did not agree with how he thought about slavery, and they didn't want him to be their president, and they didn't even want to be part of the United States anymore, so they seceded. What name did these states give their new country? They called themselves the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy for short. This was their flag. This is their flag for the Confederacy. How did Lincoln feel about the southern states seceding? Was he like, okay guys, that's good, you guys can go? Or did he think that they should stay a part of the United States? What did he think? Yeah, he said it's actually against the law for you guys to secede. It's not really how it works here. So he thought that it was against the law, and he didn't want there to be a war even though he kind of knew that that was maybe unavoidable. Why did the Confederates fire cannons on Fort Sumter? Why did the Confederates fire cannons on Fort Sumter? Let's see if we can find Fort Sumter in our pictures. Yeah, they wanted this fort to themselves. They said that this was an important port because it's where ships would come in and out of, and they wanted that for the Confederacy. Were they able to take over this fort? Yeah, yes, they were. At the end, the Union surrendered and they were able to take over, even though there was gunfire or cannon fire for 34 hours. That's almost a day and a half. All right. Why do you think Mary Chestnut took the time to write about the bombardment of Fort Sumter in her diary? Why do you guys think she took this time to write about it in her diary? Yeah, I think she wanted to remember what happened, and maybe it made her feel better to write it down. I know that I would have been very scared if all of a sudden I started hearing cannons outside of my window, so it probably would have helped her feel better. And how do you guys think she felt during this time? I know I said I would have been scared, but how do you think she felt? Yeah, she might have been worried. She might have been nervous. She could have been scared. Maybe she was excited for the South that they were going to get this port. Yeah. Alrighty, so that is the end of our comprehension questions. The next part is our word work, and then we'll jump right into what you're going to be journaling about today. And then we'll be done, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. All right, so our word work for today is Confederacy and Union. Confederacy and Union. My turn, and then your turn. Confederacy and Union. In the read aloud, you heard this. The Southern states called their new country the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy for short. And the remaining states, those who did not secede, were called the Union. The states of the South that seceded from the United States were called the Confederacy, and the states of the North that did not secede were called the Union. Right, so we know that these blue states and these gray states, actually, let's see when it's all done. Because the Confederacy actually convinced 6 more states to secede. All the battles between the Confederacy and the Union are called the U.S. Civil War. So it's called a Civil War because it's in the same territory or in the same country. What do you remember about the Confederacy and the Union from the read aloud? What do you remember? Write something down. One thing that you remember about the Confederacy and one thing that you remember about the Union. All right, guys, what words have we been learning about? Yeah, the Confederacy and the Union. All right, for this next part, I'm going to ask you some questions. If you think, okay, let's think about this. We'll do the North and the South. So the Union and the Confederacy. So if you think that this part is about the Union, you're going to write it down or you can tap your head. For the northern states or the Union, if you think it's the Confederacy, you're going to tap your shoulders or write down Confederacy. I wonder if I can write down here. Don't think I can. All right, maybe I can. Oh, they're right here. So if you need to learn how to spell them, they're right here. Confederate states and Union states. Alrighty. We fought to take Fort Sumter away from the United States and keep it to ourselves. We fought to take Fort Sumter away from the United States and keep it to ourselves. Yep, that was the Confederacy. They fought to take Fort Sumter and they wanted to keep it for themselves. We made our own flag with 13 stars, one for each state that had seceded. We made our own flag with 13 stars, one for each state that had seceded. That was also Confederacy. 3, we fought to keep all of the states together as one. We fought to keep all the states together as one. That one was the Union. We fought to protect the heritage of the South. We fought to protect the heritage of the South. That one is Confederacy. We supported Abraham Lincoln and had a flag with 34 stars, one for each original state. We supported Abraham Lincoln and had a flag with 34 stars, one for each original state. That's the Union. Last one, we were led by President Lincoln. We were led by President Lincoln. Yep, that is the Union. All right, you guys, today what I want you to do is on your journal, you're going to be describing the differences between the Union and the Confederacy. So what is the difference between the Union and the Confederacy? Some things that we know are that the Union had a flag with 34 states. We know that the Union was led by Abraham Lincoln. And we know that the Union did not want anyone to secede. They wanted to keep the country united. We also know that the Union was located in the North. Some things we know about the Confederacy. They seceded or separated from the United States. They created a new flag with 13 stars for the 13 states that seceded. They wanted slavery. And they had a new president. Oh, I need to go look up his name. I cannot remember off the top of my head. They elected, sometimes when we don't remember, it's great to go back in the story. We cannot remember everything, but it's great to go back in the story and find our answers. They elected a man named Jefferson Davis to be their president. All right, guys, so I'm looking for 3 to 4 sentences. It'll be a Google form and you're gonna fill it out as a journal, and then I'll be able to grade it and write you comments. Like I saw that Trey did an awesome one yesterday. That's why he got a shout out today. So that is all we have about the Union and the Confederacy. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. And I am so excited about hearing what you guys write about. If you have any questions about it, you can, as always, write in and I'll answer them. Have a great day, guys.